All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Eric Scott. I am the Vice President for Advancement and Communications here at Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas. But more importantly, I'm a proud board member of the Episcopal Parish Network, where the church gathers. We are happy to welcome you to this workshop examining the 2024 Parochial Report, national trends, and what this means on the ground. We are so thankful you are here and hope you'll take advantage of the multiple learning opportunities we have here at EPN. Our biggest event, our annual conference, is a wonderful opportunity to meet your colleagues face-to-face, make new connections. We're happy to announce that the 2026 annual conference will be held in Charlotte on March 3rd through 6th. Early bird registration is now open, and we hope to see you there. If you come, please come say hello to me. Just a couple of procedural items before I turn everything over to the panel. First, this session is being recorded, and you will receive, all of you, an email with a link to the recording, any additional materials provided by the panelists once they post to our website's workshop library. We try to get this out within 24 to 48 hours. Also, just know that the Q&A function is disabled for all of our workshops. Please enter your questions in the chat, and the panel will answer them during and after the session as time permits. A transcript of the chat will be available alongside the recording. Again, thank you all for being here. And now I'm very happy to introduce Molly James, the Interim Executive Officer of the General Convention Office, who will start the discussion and introduce the rest of our panel. Molly.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's a joy to be here today with my dear friends and colleagues, Charissa Mikoski and Scott Thumma from the Hartford Institute for Religion Research. We partner with them for a number of various studies, and they have also done wonderful analysis of our data. So we can tell much better stories from our data thanks to our partnership with them. So I'm going to start off walking through some of the 2024 data, and then I will turn it over to Scott and Charissa to share some more insights from the data, particularly in terms of how our data fits in with the wider picture of congregational life in America. All right, so I'm going to start sharing here and walking through some of the data. I always like to start off with a reminder, even though I know there are lots of fellow church nerds in this room who know lots and lots about the Episcopal Church. But just a reminder of our geographic context in the Pacific all the way to Taiwan, and then across to Europe with our furthest congregation to the east of the church center, at least, in Tbilisi, Georgia. And then, of course, we go south into the Caribbean and northern South America. And then, of course, always good, I think, to remind us where we are geographically concentrated in the United States, and that most of our congregations are here in the east and the south of the United States. So just always good, I think, whenever we're looking at our data to keep those geographic contexts in mind. So we'll start off here with average Sunday attendance data. Something new for 2024, which is that we have data on average Sunday attendance, not just in person now, but also online, and wanted to put this data in the context of the last decade or so. So we are seeing a continue to bump back in person attendance from COVID. So another uptick from last year, not quite back to where we were a decade ago. Although interesting to note that, if you put the online and ASA together, our numbers are significantly closer to what they were a decade ago. And worth noting there too, that we had a bump back as well in our Easter attendance in 2024 compared to 2023, although not quite back to what it was a decade ago. The important piece to look at as we think about ASA and the sort of context of the Episcopal Church is noting that the number of congregations that we have with an ASA over 200 or under 50. Now, what I think is worth noting there is that we've had, again, an uptick in churches with an ASA over 200 from last year, but still significantly lower than what it once was, and that we have an increasing number of churches with an ASA under 50. And the important thing, I think, also to note is our median in-person ASA is 38 for the Episcopal Church. Now, the median seating capacity of the Episcopal Church is far larger than that. It's 165. So it's worth remembering that while you could walk into a congregation that might be very spiritually vital and alive on a Sunday morning, the nave is likely to be less than a third full. So that's one of the challenges facing us, is the disconnect between the size of most of our buildings and the amount of people who are usually in them on Sunday mornings. Thanks to Hartford, we have a very pretty graph here that helps us to visualize this phenomenon of the fact that the vast majority of our people are in our large congregations, while the vast majority of our congregations are small. Now, if we look at some sacramental trends over the course of most of the history of the Episcopal Church, we'll see that back in the 1950s and 60s there, we were baptizing over 100,000 people a year, and baptizing far more than we were burying. But that trend has since reversed. And so our sacramental trends have declined along with our attendance. Also worth noting some of the demographics. The vast majority of folks in our pews are middle or senior adults. Our median age is 60. Now, I do think there's one bright spot that's worth focusing on this slide, in the fact that our percentage of children is larger than our percentage of youth, which gives hope, I think, for how the trend could change going forward, given the number of children who are in our pews and how that's a tremendous growth opportunity as those folks become youth and young adults. One of the ways to highlight the diversity of the Episcopal Church is in terms of the languages that are offered. And so this is a chart with all of the various languages that worship is conducted in the Episcopal Church, in some cases simultaneously to English, and in some cases separate services. So it's really a tremendous reflection of our diversity. So worth noting, and all much of this information is available in a wonderful report that Hartford put forward to us, which we will be sure you get a link to after this webinar. I always think it's good to look at our data in the context of the wider historical realities in America. So that graph with the green line there, that's the birth rate for the 20th century in the United States. And then, of course, there's the membership of the Episcopal Church. So worth noting the similarity of those curves. So it's, I think, always important to remind ourselves that the fact that our pews were so full in the 1950s and 1960s is not necessarily because our grandparents were better at evangelism than we are, but more that the people who were already in our pews just simply had more children. And so we were growing internally from within our own community. Worth looking at that blue line above the green line there, that's the number of live births in the United States. So the potential for future members of the Episcopal Church is great as the population of the United States continues to grow. Another interesting phenomenon, if you look at the history of the Episcopal Church, in the 1950s was about the time we started having more clergy than parishes. For much of our history, we did have clergy serving multiple parishes. So I know that's a reality in many dioceses now, so it's not a foreign one, and certainly a large part of our history as the Episcopal Church. Often we hear about church closures, and that is true. We have closed 279 churches in the last 5-6 years. But I think it's also important to say we've started 122. So while the number of closures is still greater than starts, it's not just a story of shutting doors. There are literally more than 100 new communities that have been started in the last few years as well. Important to look at our finances over time. Now, the declines in average Sunday attendance can certainly lead to concern over the realities of decline in the church. While it's important to note, I think, for us that our finances have not declined at the same rate as our attendance. Now, those numbers are not adjusted for inflation, but overall that the finances have held relatively steady. Certainly a distinct contrast to the decline in terms of people. Although worth noting that for the first time this year, our expenses collectively are slightly higher than our income. So we can see that the challenge that is before us collectively as a church will be, how to find sustainable financial realities at all levels of the church in light of the challenges of income and the cost of things across the board these days. A little bit more on congregational finances here, which is note that our congregational investments and endowments, even adjusted for inflation, are higher collectively. And plate and pledge is not quite as high, but remarkably close to what it was a decade ago, given the changes we've seen in terms of people. And another challenge that will need to be addressed at various levels is the reality that there are many congregations who currently have debt, and how do we help them live sustainably into the future with that reality. Then if we look at our people, look at the significant numbers of lay staff who make the church run. Significantly about 3 times as many as clergy, so worth noting there. And that our numbers, for non-stipendiary or part-time clergy really do actually outweigh our full-time clergy as a church. So the reality with lots of small-time congregations, of course, means we have a significant number of clergy who are serving part-time or on a non-stipendiary basis. Although most of our worship is still led by clergy, full and part-time, with some supply, and a small percentage of congregations have worship that is led by a lay person. And then one of the great things that came out of the new form for the Parochial Report is a better sense of what is going on at our congregations on a weekly basis beyond just what happens on Sunday morning. And so Hartford put together this wonderful graphic for us to get a sense of the great variety of initiatives and programs and ways in which things are happening in the building, from whole varieties of worship to music to study to lots of outreach, and all the ways in which congregations are engaging their community. So I would encourage you to look at this in more detail, and the ways as well in the report that congregations are telling their stories through qualitative data. And as well, it's really wonderful to have this wider picture of congregational life. And speaking of wider pictures, I will stop sharing now and turn it over to Scott and Charissa to share some of how the Episcopal Church fits in the wider landscape of congregational life.
Well, thank you, Molly. Let me get this sharing going. And also hello to everyone. What I'd like to do is you heard some of the details of the Episcopal congregations. I want to offer a little bit broader and contextual picture from our other work at the Institute. Much of what I'm going to say relies on Charissa's fine work, just as the Parochial Report does as well. I'm primarily drawing on two of our major projects in my conversation today. The first one is a project that's been going on since 2000 called Faith Communities Today. And the Episcopal Church is a partner of that ever since it began. It's a collaborative study of congregations across the country and tracks congregational life and health and trends. And the other is a 5-year study that we're engaged in, looking at how congregations have adapted and changed since the pandemic. And kind of what I want to do is show you a few of the findings here, and then we'll go into some other things. These are some of the trends that we're seeing within Christian congregations generally in the United States. It's pretty clear that worship is still down from what it was pre-pandemic, but it has rebounded considerably. We're also seeing that the median age of the people who attend continues to rise, much as what Molly described for you. And also the age of clergy has continued to rise. Also, not too surprising, we're seeing a lot more online worship and use of technology since the pandemic, online giving and other sorts of forms. But somewhat surprising, other kinds of programming is down somewhat since the pandemic began. And volunteering, we saw during the pandemic, drop significantly, but that has mostly rebounded and is going relatively strong at this point. We've also noticed that the level of conflict in many congregations has gone down, and I think this is probably somewhat related. But when we ask about the future of the congregation, most congregations describe it as quite positive. There was an enormous uptick in congregations' willingness to change during the pandemic and right after the pandemic. We were excited about that quite a bit. However, we've noticed that rubber band is kind of constricting a little bit now, and folks are kind of hunkering down and saying, okay, we've changed enough, we're not going to change anymore. But as we all know, congregations still need to do a good bit of changing because the world continues to change. But I want to also give you a little bit longer picture than just the last few years. So our Faith Communities Today material goes from 2000, and clearly what we have seen across that time period is that the trend in-person attendance is pretty significantly down. In 2000, the median, which is the midpoint, half the congregations are above, half are below, that midpoint was 137 people in worship on a given weekend. And in our 2023 national survey, we found that had fallen to 60. During the pandemic, it was significantly lower. It's come up a little bit, but that's a pretty significant drop in a relatively short period of time. Now, some of that is because even the core people in congregations are probably less likely to be weekly attenders now. They may have reduced their frequency of attending, but it also indicates, and we'll talk some more about this, the challenge of younger generations and incorporating younger generations. And as Molly hinted earlier, some of the existing Episcopal folks are just not giving birth the way they did back in the 1960s and 50s. If they just were a little more fertile now. But in any case, it really does indicate that the trends that you see in the Episcopal Church are trends that are actually affecting not just the Episcopal Church, not just mainline congregations, but all congregations across the country. Now, obviously, some other things have taken place in terms of attendance, and you saw with the numbers for the Episcopal Church that is also true generally across the board. When you begin to factor in online attendance and folks watching the streaming service or checking it out later in the week, attendance figures can get boosted quite a bit. And in fact, almost and do go higher than they did prior to the pandemic. But we have also done in our pandemic research our latest survey of 24,000 attenders, and that data shows that the people who participate online are not exactly identical to the people who are involved in person. That there are some significant differences and maybe not equivalent to the in-person attendance. That's something we would be happy to talk about. But I think, again, what Molly and the Parochial Report shows in terms of online and in person, it really parallels very much what the country as a whole is experiencing. Now, I want to look a little more closely at attendance comparatively. And this is very similar in some ways to what also we see with the Episcopal Church. There has been some. Sorry, I lost my place here. You can see that the Episcopal data that shows the median attendance is 38 and online average attendance is 3, but in fact with a combined of 46 is very, very similar to the mainline Protestants generally. That looks a little bit different than all congregations across the nation, but it's really not that far away. It does indicate that it's a little bit different than the evangelical churches or Catholic and Orthodox congregations. I have heard, Molly, and I think it's accurate to talk about sometimes the Episcopal Church as a denomination of smaller churches. And as you can see in the chart on this screen, that's generally true for all religious groups in the United States. But there is a bit of an interesting pattern, though, when you look at the Episcopal Church compared to the mainline Protestants. You actually see that there's a larger percentage of Episcopal congregations under 25, but also this interesting bump in larger congregations compared to the mainline Protestants. So it's a slightly different dynamic. Now it does look a little bit different than all congregations, but there are some interesting differences and trends. But I want to stay a little bit more on the size distribution because Molly showed you the Episcopal Church's distribution, and that's an interesting one. But when you compare it to the pattern of all congregations in the country, you see a very, very different and even more skewed analysis based on size. Charissa and I deal with congregational life all the time. And the first question is always, what's the size of the congregation? Because it makes a pretty significant difference. In all of the congregations in the United States, somewhere in the neighborhood of 375,000, only 10% of those congregations have 73% of all the people that are in worship. This tremendous skewing of where the people are and in how many congregations. But that also means that for roughly 80% of the congregations in the United States, they only have about 20% of the people. This is a really significant unequal distribution. And it's even more lopsided than if you look at what Molly showed you before, the distribution of an Episcopal church. You still see some of the concentration of people in the larger congregations, but nothing compared to the country as a whole. And I think in some ways, this is your distribution is probably a healthier distribution. And I think it's worth us talking a little bit more about the pros and cons of some of that. In general, when we talk about congregational life, Charissa and I always go to size and to age because those are pretty significant determinants of a host of other organizational characteristics and resources and all sorts of things. And as you can see, there's almost no congregation or religious tradition that actually parallels the US population in terms of ages. The US population age distribution is the dark black bar on this graphic. The overall US attenders distribution is the red bar. And then we have included here the mainline attenders and the Episcopal Church pattern as well. And it's pretty apparent that all U.S. churches, the mainline and the Episcopal Church, nowhere comes close to representing the percentage of especially young adults in the 18 to 34 range, or even the older adults somewhat in the 35 to 64 range. That looks completely different once you get over the age of 65. And in fact, the Episcopal parishes look almost identical to the mainline generally, slightly different for all U.S. congregations, but I would say, and I say often to clergy, that this is something that we really should be aware of and think about, because the future generations are truly the future of congregations and denominations. But you can also see, as Molly pointed out, that in fact the population of those youngest children is actually higher than the 13 to 17-year-olds. So it does indicate that perhaps there might be a bump up, and the importance of holding on to and retaining those 13 to 17-year-olds as they move from nursery and youth children's programs to young adult and out of the congregation. I also want to talk just very briefly about income, giving, funding. You saw that in the Episcopal Church there was a rise, and this is true also for congregations generally. There has been considerable growth in financing in the past few years. The Episcopal median congregational income is actually even better than the blue line, the reported income that you see on the screen here. In 2023, the median income for an average Episcopal church was about $192,000, which is significantly higher than the overall average. But the green line is what Molly was referencing earlier too, that if we correct for and control for inflation, no congregation trend comes close to keeping up with the rate of inflation. And so while the income continues to rise, it still doesn't rise to the level of the bills and the needs in one's budget exactly. Staying with income, one final observation is, and I think a distinctive in the Episcopal world, most congregations in the United States rely on and receive the bulk of their income, about 85% of their income, from individual givings in terms of offerings and tithes and dues. Whereas in the Episcopal Church, in the latest parochial report, shows that Episcopal pledge and other contributions from individuals account for just 57% of the total income that a church would generally get. Now, I think this also is worth us discussing, perhaps, and could be interpreted as a pretty positive sign within congregations. Not only do they have endowments, but perhaps increasingly a diversity of revenue streams and sources of income that might allow for a bit more stability when the people who are giving are decreasing all the time. So I hope that's offered a larger contextual picture to set the parochial report in, and we're happy to discuss the larger trends in light of the findings of the parochial report and more about the parochial report as well. So thank you very much, and we have all of our data on in reports that you can find at covidreligionresearch.org or the Hartford Institute website or our Faith Communities Today partnership as well.
Thanks, Scott. All right. Well, we've already gotten some questions in the chat here. One was a simple one, which was asking what exactly was meant by all congregations. And so that's not just the main line, but that's looking at all congregations across the US from the Faith Communities Today study. So that's comparing the Episcopal Church in light of the whole of congregational life in America, not just our mainline siblings, right?
Yes, in terms of the Faith Communities Today data, and that's when I tend to use all.
Yes.
That does include synagogues, it includes mosques, Baha'i, Hindu, others. Our post-pandemic research is predominantly focused on Christian congregations.
Yep. And someone was asking about the time frame we were talking about. So some of the parochial report data I was looking back well, historically over much of the history of the Episcopal Church in various graphs, but generally speaking, looking at the sort of last decade. And then of course, most of the FACT research goes back to 2000, and the EPIC COVID project obviously started in 2021, really was the first data we had out of that. So someone would like to know what the age distribution would look like for evangelical Protestant churches and or non-denominational churches. Do we know the answer? Do you know the answer to that one?
Yeah, and if not, I'll make it up.
Oh.
I do know a lot of my own work focuses on evangelical and non-denominational congregations, and it really isn't all that much different. There are certain evangelical groups, non-denominational groups that trend slightly younger, and much of that is because they have a slightly different birth rate for the most part. But there isn't any. In fact, much of my own research in megachurches, people think megachurches, they're really growing and such. Even they don't come close to measuring up to the distribution in the United States. So all congregations really, except perhaps mosques and some other immigrant-fueled congregations come close to that.
Thanks. Someone also asked about sort of budgetary things on small and medium-sized parishes, maybe perhaps thinking of particularly about small congregations in large buildings, and whether there's sort of any guidance we're gaining about, how congregations could use their buildings, particularly when they have a small group in a large physical plant. I think we've had some conversations about that, certainly from the FACT data, and of course the Parochial Report data is now telling us a bit more about what congregations are doing with their buildings.
So one of the things we found in some of our other research about building sharers is that Mainline, I think, had some of the highest rates of sharing, and often it tends to be with things like nonprofits or other congregations. So I think leaning into some of that and partnering with other in the local community would be like a really good, thought. We've also looked at congregations that rent their space to people and if they charge rent or not. And most don't. Some have different kinds of ways of working out an agreement. Some is for use, some is through rent, some is through expense sharing, which could be something to explore, of not necessarily them paying a fixed rate of rent, but they help cover the electricity for a certain percentage if they're using more light or whatever.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd say that certainly to that person certainly is a live conversation across the church. So and in data communities as well. So I'm sure there will be more on that going forward. Someone asked if they could see trend lines about age distribution. I will say we haven't always collected age data on the Parochial Report, but we have collected, numbers of baptisms of children versus baptisms of adults. So I can certainly say, from that baptismal trend graph, clearly, we used to trend younger than we do now, but I don't have the exact numbers because that's not something we have always asked on the Parochial Report about age. But we do have it there now, so we will have trend data, at least some going forward. And that report that I was showing you some excerpts from, it was sent out by our public affairs office. So it is out there available, and it will be back also posted on the General Convention website this week. So it is out and available, and we'll make sure it comes to you all who are registered to this. Someone asked about the number of schools, because that's higher than the number of the National Association of Episcopal Schools. And yes, it is a broad definition of school. So that would include, preschools and other school programs, not necessarily a congregation checking the school box didn't necessarily mean that they have a, formal K-8 education program. Or so that's why that number is larger than what the National Association of Episcopal Schools, because it would include preschools as well. Right,
Molly, if I may jump in a second,
please.
to go back to the trend on age distribution.
Oh, yes.
I happen to have. I mean, there aren't many age distribution pictures of individual denominations, but I have one of the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, which you are part
siblings.
of, but back from 2008. So, I mean, a significant time ago. And let me share my screen real quick, and you can see an almost identical distribution. So hopefully you can see this. Everybody can see this. This is from 2008, and the black line is the U.S. population at that time.
Okay.
And this is the trend. The purple bars are the trends for a very, very accurate breakdown of age.
Wow.
And it almost is telling the exact same story that our data is telling now. And we also have one very similar to this for the Presbyterian Church USA, a mainline denomination as well. And the pattern is almost identical. So this has been, at least since 2000, the trend of not holding or not appealing to younger generations. Now, that there was always some of that, right? And we all, after college, sort of dropped out, for a while and that kind of thing. But what we're seeing, especially with the rise of the nuns that you've probably heard about from Pew and other groups, these younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, others, just really are not coming into congregational life the way their parents and grandparents had. And so that pattern is pretty pronounced. Yeah.
Thank you. Somebody asked if there's any data about house churches. Well, I have to say a sort of qualified maybe on that one. So it is up to each diocese to decide who gets to who should file a parochial report in their diocese. So that data may include some of those, or it may not. I do know, that we aren't capturing, every community that worships in an Episcopal way in a given week. We're seeking to find ways to better capture data from our, military and healthcare chaplaincies, as well as schools that aren't associated with congregations, and chaplaincies and conference centers and camps and conference centers and things like that. So stay tuned on getting more data there. But I do know the folks who are, there are lots of grants happening for church planting, and there certainly is more happening on that, growth of small church communities. So stay tuned.
Also, in the FACT 2025 survey that we're collecting right now, that the Episcopal Church is participating in and already has a few hundred responses, one of the questions is in what building they worship, and if they're not in a building that they own, if they're renting a space or using some other kind of space, we're tracking that. So in the coming months, we might have a little insight into some of those as well.
Great. Good to know.
Yeah, Molly, we might want to inform people too. The
Yes.
relationship that we have now with the Episcopal Church, a lot of the research that we do at the Hartford Institute and with Faith Communities Today, the Episcopal Church is active members, and we, with our relationship with the Episcopal Church, we will be doing a lot more analysis and writing reports specific to your own data, which asks a host of other questions beyond what the parochial report does. So it allows some interesting windows into the life of the Episcopal Church in a way that the parochial report can't capture each year, kind of thing. But
yes, and would say that for anyone who's on here, if your congregation has received a link to fill out the FACT survey for 2025, and thank you, many of you already have. And if you haven't, please do, because as Scott said, it provides us with a more complete picture of our congregational life than the parochial report, and asks other kinds of questions that really help us to gain a better understanding. So that's helpful. Someone said, what is FACT 2025? So Faith Communities Today is a consortium, a collaborative effort of studying congregational life in America that's gone on since 2000, and the Episcopal Church has been a part of it. And it really asks other questions than what we gather from the parochial report to get a fuller sense of congregational life. And it's a really rich data set, and made richer by all the contributions. So if you have any questions about that, you can email us. I will put an email address for the General Convention office in the chat. But all our congregations have the opportunity to participate. Someone has asked about churches that collect money on behalf of other organizations, and whether there's a difference in giving when that's the case. I don't know that we have that level of financial detail, but I think we could maybe dig into that. So Evan, we will take that as a interesting suggestion to look at more deeply in financial analysis in the future. And then what someone has asked, what about the recent Gen Z bump? I believe that was a topic of conversation this weekend at the Religious Research Association. Perhaps one of you would like to share.
Scott has a lot of thoughts.
Well, and I'm interested to hear what Molly heard this weekend too. So there is some indication that Gen Z people who are in congregations have increased their activity level higher than millennials and Gen X, right? That they seem to be participating at a higher rate than some of those other generations. But as you saw from the distribution, there are still significantly fewer of them involved in congregational life. So it's a pretty difficult question to answer, because there does seem to be a little bit of a trend up. Maybe not a trend up enough that it's going to significantly change dynamics. One of the other things that we looked at in the recent attender survey that we have at least a general report of out in public right now, we were looking specifically at the Gen Z, and did they do religious practices more often than other generations, and they don't seem to be attending all that much more, or praying that much more, reading their Bibles that much more, but they do seem to be far more engaged in alternative kinds of spiritual practices, going online for faith, doing using nature as a kind of spiritual practice, using exercise, yoga, other physical activities as a spiritual practice, writing, reflecting, journaling. And so I think somewhat we're also seeing not only a little bit more interest about spiritual and religious things, but also a diversity of religious practices in a way that we hadn't seen before in millennials or Gen X.
Yeah, one of the panelists this
Yeah.
weekend, who was the chaplain at the University of Minnesota, was saying that all the worship experiences on campus have seen a bump in recent time of people sort of just in the midst of everything seeking something stable and perhaps a bit more transcendent. So there does, I think this is a unfolding story, and we sort of have to see, see where it goes. Someone has asked about what we know about online worship availability, attendance, and formation. I would say that last chart that I showed, and which will be sent out to you all, talks about the, sort of how many congregations are conducting some kind of online formation, what kinds of online worship they're doing. I would say it's significant. And, if you look at our attendance numbers, on a Sunday morning, a quarter of our people are going to church online. So it's definitely a growing area, and I think we'll just continue to learn more about it with continued fact surveys as we dig in more into the attender data. And then Scott, someone has said to share more by what was meant by immigrant-fueled communities.
Yeah, I don't remember saying that to me, but I mean, what I have meant often by something like that is there are a number of denominational traditions where the immigrants coming into the United States, often Latino, are younger, are more likely to be Christian than any other faith tradition. And because they're younger, they often have more offspring, and therefore not only is the number for a long time increasing until fairly recently, but they also were at an age and a point in their lives where they were having more children, and they were young families and that sort of thing. And so that often increased their numbers. So it remains to be seen what the changes in immigration patterns over the last year are going to have an effect on denominational groups like the Assemblies of God, like the Catholic Church, two groups that significantly benefited from especially Latino immigrants coming into the country.
Mhm. Thank you.
Molly, can I add some
Yes.
more about the online stuff? So nationally, the last time we asked in spring of 23, we found that about 80% of congregations had online worship, I believe. Is that right, Scott? So it grew very quickly in the pandemic, and most people have kept it around, and those are congregations, and most congregations that offer it, about 3/4 of them anticipated that they would still have it in 5 years. So instead of being just kind of a temporary fix, it seemed to be like a more permanent adjustment. But in terms of the other activities being offered online, we saw that that was popular in the early years of the pandemic, but has mostly fallen away. So things like Sunday school opportunities for children and youth, or meetings and that kind of thing, are less likely to be available in a hybrid or online fashion across the board. Now, the Episcopal Church, I haven't looked at specifically to know if they have any different patterns, but that's what it looks like in the national.
Great. Thank you. Very helpful. Great. Just scrolling back here to see if we had any others. I think we've covered most of the questions that have been asked in the chat. We certainly have a few more minutes if oh good, here comes one about online participation.
You want to take that, Charissa? Although we both are embedded in some of that lately.
Yeah. Well, I don't.
They've only
see the
we
question
got,
yet.
We got a subject matter for the question, but not the question itself yet. So.
Well, that allows for a broad interpretation.
Broad online participation.
Well, I can also add that while the question is coming, that in our attender survey, we asked people if they participate in person or online. And to the online people, we asked why they're going, what they're doing while they're doing online worship, and how satisfied they are with it. And we found that most people who are opting for online worship are satisfied with their experience, but it's only a fairly small percent that are opting for that way. And we found that about 2/3, I think it is, Scott, of people who are doing online worship are also doing something else. So they might be cooking breakfast or caring for children or cleaning up their living room. But that doesn't preclude them for also singing along, praying along, reading the Bible, doing these other things in worship while doing online worship. So,
yeah.
Oh yeah, look at that. There's the numbers. So only about 7% in that graph are exclusive onliners. There's about 1 in 5 who mix, Sunday to Sunday. It might differ if they are out of town or if they're too lazy to get out of bed. It happens to all of us.
And some of the question here was about who's online, and that it is actually a pretty broad cross section of people, and not necessarily just young people or just older folks who may have health challenges as a reason. But
yeah, we found that those
mix.
People who mix their attendance tended to be families with children or younger, more diverse. Whereas the people who are exclusively or primarily online were older adults, more likely to be doing it because they're homebound or caregiving for someone. So there is kind of a multiple realities of why people are choosing online worship. And that's something for us to dig into more about these different groups and why they're doing it online and if they would ever be coming in person or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Someone's asked whether that's going to a growing trend, and I'll say stay tuned for next year because we don't have enough data yet to know about the online worship being a trend, because we've only just figured out how to sort of categorize and count that in a cohesive way. Someone has wondered what are common factors associated with growing parishes. I'd say we could probably talk a little about that, but that's another area in which we are going to delve into more deeply. So stay tuned for more detail on that. But Scott and Charissa, you might have something off the top of your head there.
Well, one of the things is a very clear sense of mission and purpose, and that identity, that purpose, is shared by not just the leader, but the congregation as a whole. You know, in some sense, we sometimes in our field talk about it as a kind of niche congregation, like they have a really clear brand of sorts, and an identity for being together. In addition to just being a worshiping community, right? We stand for something, or we live that out, and that highly correlates with a greater sense of us being spiritually vital and alive, but also increased participation, increased involvement, increased new people, all of that sort of thing. And that varies. I think somebody said, does it make a difference, like older congregations, smaller congregations, younger congregations? I think that cuts across size, it cuts across age groupings. If one has a vision and an identity beyond just being an Episcopal church, it really is conducive to a healthy, vital congregation.
Thanks. And then we have a number of questions here that's sort of wondering sort of like how our parish is responding to the current realities. And I would say we have some of that data in the program report in terms of having a sense of, you know, the changes over time, as well as new information about what's going on in congregations. And we will have even more data from the FACT surveys and from the recent attender survey. So again, I'll offer a stay tuned for more data and more analysis that will be coming in the coming months. And certainly, you know, glad to have additional questions. You all now know how to reach us and engage with this data, and we will share it back with you all, and we'll check the chat afterwards to be sure if we missed any other questions. We'll try to follow up individually. But thank you, Scott. Thank you, Charissa. It's always a joy to hang out and talk about church data with you, and really appreciate everyone joining us today, and look forward to continuing the conversation in lots of ways. So thank you all.